Welcome back to Newcastle Fans TV, and I'm delighted to be joined by quite simply the best in the business now. He is chief football writer at the Times, Henry Winter. Henry, how you doing?
How you doing, mate? You okay in lockdown?
It's all a bit surreal, as we all know by now. But how about yourself? How are you finding it?
I mean, it's just been chaos every day with work. I mean, even though the Newcastle United takeover has sort of gone slightly quiet, I mean, the whole lockdown, the whole project restart, talking to players, talking to managers, talking to agents and chief executives, what's the future of football, short term, long term. I mean, I have to say, it's been, I spent my whole life going to games, but I've just been in this room, in the study, just talking to people. And obviously everyone's so concerned about what's happening in football and obviously more significantly in the outside world.
The kind of big news story during this lockdown, before we kind of get onto Project Restart and whatnot, is the Newcastle United takeover. I seem to remember an article you wrote years and years ago now about Mike Ashley setting fire to Newcastle United's famous club history. I believe that was shortly after he renamed the stadium the Sports Direct Arena, which less is said about that, the better. Do you think football's now better off without Mike Ashley in any capacity and with his involvement?
I think Newcastle United are better off, and football generally is better off. I think talking to people at other clubs from a neutral perspective, if you can have a neutral perspective in English football, I think a lot of people at other clubs find Mike Ashley slightly an embarrassing owner, particularly of a club like Newcastle United. Look, you would know far better than I would, but as an outsider coming in, I can't really think of too many places where a club is so embedded in its community. I mean, wherever you walk in town, it looms large emotionally, physically, as the building sort of on the hill, the cathedral on the hill. I mean, for me, it's always been one of the great walks anywhere in world football, and I've been fortunate to cover football in so many different countries, so many different stadiums. But that walk from the station, in fact, I think the journey starts. I mean, I live in the Midlands, so I get on the train at Peterborough, and say for a Sunday match, there'll always be Newcastle United fans on the train. Obviously, got jobs in London coming up, and just talking all the way up. And I always find all the guards on Virgin or Eastern to be Newcastle United fans. So the whole journey all the way up, whatever it is, 3 hours, and then the excitement builds and more Newcastle fans get on at Darlington, at Durham, and then obviously all disgorging out at Newcastle. And that walk through the back up the Ginnells, people in the pubs watching the earlier matches. I mean, it still seems like only yesterday that it was the 5-0 against Manchester United, and I always remind Philippe Albert whenever I see him, just thanks for giving me the intro when he just sort of went through and scored that amazing goal against Schmeichel. So it's one of those. This is a long way of saying that Newcastle United, to use the Barcelona expression, is more than a club, and you truly are more than a club. This is about a community. This is about an identity. I mean, I spent 1.5 years writing a book with Michael Carrick and spent some time with his parents up in Newcastle, and they very much educated me even more in the way of, Newcastle. I mean, things like, I can remember Alan Shearer's testimonial. I mean, not many players have that sort of testimonial and that sort of emotional engagement with an individual, what Alan represents. And I think that Mike Ashley didn't represent that. I know people try to see this as almost a north-south thing, and he was, the Cockney who came up and, get him out of our club. But bad owners come from everywhere. Bad owners can come from the other side of the world, or they can come from down the road. But I think what Mike Ashley, for someone who's such a brilliant businessman, as we've seen in the high street and other walks of life, he just didn't get Newcastle. He didn't get Newcastle United fans. He didn't understand that cups matter. I mean, people sometimes depict Newcastle United fans as being these big dreamers. I've actually found I've got a lot of mates who are Newcastle United fans in the industry, and just sort of people you sort of meet along the way. And I think pretty down to earth. You're not expecting to win the Champions League. Although I can remember being in, I think it was the press room at Marseille. You played Marseille, didn't you, in the Champions League?
UEFA Cup, I think Marseille was.
Apologies.
2005.
I can remember that, the run in Europe, and being in the press room. Didier Drogba came in. He's playing for Marseille at the time. Came in and just had his underpants on. He had a huge bottle of champagne. And there were about sort of 10 of us, so, you know, Newcastle United reporters and me. I think I was at the Telegraph at the time, and he was spraying us all with champagne and saying, "Le roast beef, we've won, you know, Marseille have won." And I remember a couple of my colleagues, mates, Newcastle United reporters and probably supporters as well. I mean, I was trying to protect my laptop, and they were sort of jumping in the way to try and get some of the champagne. So look, you do things a bit differently. It's a special place. Mike Ashley didn't get that. And I think you talk to anyone in football and they will say the disconnect between Newcastle United fans and what they represent and what they want, just a cup run. You're not expecting to win the Champions League or the league. You know, you just want pride in the shirt. And I think Mike robbed you of that. I've only met him once when I lost that bet with you lot and I had to swim the Tyne. And Mike Ashley, to be fair to him, said, you know, come up and see us in the press room, in the boardroom afterwards, and there was no eye contact. I had probably about 3 minutes with him, and we talked about the 3 issues of the day, whatever it was: player wages, fixture congestion. And he's got that amazing strategic mind. And I walked away thinking, first, my flies were undone, because he kept sort of looking down and there was no eye contact or whatever. And I walked away thinking, this is such an intelligent guy. Why hasn't he understood that Newcastle United is not just a business? It's not, you know, a shop on the high street like he's you know, where he is so good. It's about emotion. It's about fun. It's about a night out. I mean, God, I'm getting flashbacks now to that boat you used to have on the river with the revolving dance floor on a slope and sliding off that about 2 o'clock in the morning with probably some of your colleagues. Look, Newcastle United is a special place. And Newcastle as a city is a special place. I mean, my kids' generation, they all want to go there because it's such a good place to, obviously, good university, good place to study. But yeah, he just, you know, you'll be well rid of Mike Ashley. No, I don't need to tell you that. But I think football generally just thought, actually, that's not really known. Who cares?
Do you think he's always been a willing seller? Because given the comments he made a few years ago about Amanda Staveley, who is back with a vengeance, it seems. He called her a time waster and a tire kicker not 3 years ago. Do you think he's always been one that's been as willing to sell as he makes out to be?
Do you know, this is a conversation I would always have when people who know far more about it than me, but people like Luke Edwards and George Cork and people like that in the press room. And I got Simon Burr, and I'll go and sort of talk to them, Mickey Walker, and I would say, does he really want to sell? And I can't remember who it was, but there was a quiet moment, or the game was delayed, or half time, or whatever. I think one of your colleagues actually counted up how many mentions there were of Sports Direct within the stadium itself, i.e. that the cameras could pick up. And I think they ran out of time at about 120 signs up there, obviously the huge ones, and then, you know, the smaller ones by the seats. So for a long time I thought, why is he selling? Why, when he is getting all this amazing advertising for his company around the world, and he turned that great stadium, which I always associate with Sir John Hall and Sir Bobby Robson, why is he turning their spiritual home into basically an advertising hoarding? But then that's the way his mind works. St James's Park and the football club was merely a backdrop to promote Sports Direct. So maybe he wasn't. I mean, only he could tell you. But the other thing I didn't understand in all this is that you look at the growth. Obviously, we're talking pre-COVID here, but you look at the growth of football clubs and how much they're worth, the exponential growth seemingly of broadcast deals, the fact that the Premier League is the #1 sports league in the world, ahead of NBA, ahead of Gridiron, NFL. It always seemed to be going quite cheaply. It's a one-club city. It's got an airport. I know American owners want a base in the south and all that, and that's why Millwall went ahead of Leeds for American owners. But you know, it's not a difficult place to get to. It's a fantastic city. It's got an identity. It ticks, horrible phrase, but it ticks all the box for potential owners. It's got a huge fan base, not just locally, but around the world. I thought, you know, it was at 350 million, whether it's now 300 million. I always thought that for a Premier League club, which wasn't particularly in the Rafa era, and Steve Bruce, to be fair, wasn't at risk of going down. I didn't really see. I just thought that was cheap. You know, I mean, I haven't got 300 million in my back pocket, but actually, if you're an American multi-billionaire and you want some fun, a bit of a journey and a long-term investment, Newcastle United is worth 400 million. So the finances didn't quite stack up, but it looks like he is selling now. It looks like you're about to be liberated. Touch wood.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, the beers are very much on ice.
The whole cans thing. I mean, my God, I'm very careful about what I write on Twitter nowadays. I don't go anywhere near that word, because it's just, it's I know how emotive it is.
Yeah, it's kind of brilliant in a way.
one word texts from friends who are Newcastle United fans, sort of abroad, who maybe are not completely in tune as you guys are in terms of how close it is or whatever, and it's just that one word with a question mark after it, and I go, oh my God, I just hope it comes. I mean, it'll be quite a party. I hope lockdown's ended by then.
Yeah, I mean, that first day, I mean, should it happen, obviously, as we speak now, it's not official, despite what you read here, there and everywhere on Twitter. That first day at St James's Park, post-lockdown, post-Mike Ashley, is going to be one hell of a day. So about the new owners then, does the skeptic in you think it's a bit curious that it's a consortium? I mean, the Saudis were obviously linked to Manchester United a few years ago. Why do you think they've gone in with a consortium with the Reuben brothers and Amanda Staveley?
Well, I think for fairly self-evident reasons. I mean, if they just came in as 100% Saudi bid without the respectability of the Reuben brothers and of Amanda Staveley, I think the Reuben brothers, they've got connections with Newcastle racetrack. You'd know better than I've. They're well known locally. They're obviously well known and well respected nationally. Ditto Amanda Staveley. So I think it makes sense for them to go in with guides on the ground, as it were, fairly expensive guides in Amanda Staveley and the Reuben brothers, but also clearly because everyone can see that they're buying it, not so much for commercial reasons, not so much for sporting reasons, but also for representing themselves in a different way. And I think the scrutiny would just be possibly intolerable if it was just them coming in on their own. The fact that the interest or the focus is diluted by having the Reuben brothers and Amanda Staveley is, it's a fairly straightforward and obvious tactic they're using.
This whole reported issue about the be out queue and the TV piracy deals, do you think it's as big as an issue as the likes of Richard Keys and so on make out that it is? Do you foresee any kind of problems with the fit and proper persons test going through, or are you still expecting it to all pass?
I mean, I've been writing about football for 35 years now, and the one thing I've learned is that it's money before morals every time, particularly in the Premier League, and the being out and the piracy is an issue. If you talk to other clubs, executives at other clubs, in the first 3 minutes of the conversation about Newcastle United takeover, they won't mention Amnesty International and human rights. They'll mention broadcast rights. I mean, it is a big issue for them. So I think if anything scuppers it, and all the indications, and again, your ears are to the ground, you're far closer to this. And I respect people like George and Luke who are writing about it on a regular basis, daily basis. If all the indications of travel are pushing towards it coming through. But I would imagine the Premier League spent longer looking at the piracy issue than about human rights. Now, you can have a long debate or short debate about whether it's right or wrong, but that's the reality of it. I know a couple of the consortiums in America who were and are still looking at the situation with deep curiosity and an element of frustration, because what they're debating is they say, well, won't the Premier League, if they throw it out, won't it be because of the piracy rather than because of the human rights? So yeah, I mean, the piracy thing is a big issue because of the financial implications for overseas broadcasters, and every penny counts in the Premier League now. So look, they're basically getting players to go back playing early because of the broadcast deal. That's how the 20 clubs look at television money.
Reports and almost trying to make the Newcastle fans feel a bit guilty that this takeover is happening. Obviously, the reports from Miguel Delaney spring to mind and so on. But do you think that's kind of fair for Newcastle supporters to be kind of made to feel guilty about this takeover?
Well, I know Miguel Delaney, and he's a highly respected journalist, and I think what he is voicing on social media and in print are genuine and very natural concerns. I do feel that you've got to put it into a broader context of, which I've tried to do when I've written about it, that we are a country with close links to the Saudis in terms of arms sales. I mean, arms sales versus football club sales. I mean, which does more damage. There are links obviously between the royal families. I don't think that Newcastle United fans should be made to be the moral arbiters of our foreign policy. I mean, I'm able to travel out to Saudi Arabia. If you go on the FCO website, you can see if there are any issues with individual countries. But I also, I know people. I've done work with Amnesty International on refugees. Slightly different issue, but they are. You've only got to read the Amnesty International reports to realise that actually parts of the regime are pretty despicable. So I think when the press conference happens, I think if it all does go through, I think there will be protests. But you cannot blame the Newcastle United fans, first for wanting to get rid of Mike Ashley, secondly for wanting the celebration after the liberation, for getting rid of someone who simply doesn't represent their club. And you also can't blame them for actually wanting an owner in who has been linked with other clubs, who one or two other owners in the Premier League might not be the most wholesome people. And if the government say they've got no problem with the takeover, and it looks that way, if the Premier League have no problem with the takeover, then why should necessarily Newcastle United fans be the ones to force this investment away? I think it does damage the image of the club. I don't think you can dispute that, but I think every owner comes with baggage. And maybe the Newcastle United fans, if this all does go through, can actually turn around. And the one thing that the new owners will do is open dialogues with you, with the supporters organisation, with the fans, because they'll basically just look at what Mike Ashley's done for the last 13 years and do exactly the opposite. And Amanda Staveley's intelligent. The Reuben brothers are obviously very intelligent as well. They'll open the lines of dialogue. And if that flows both ways, and maybe if Newcastle United fans, again, it's not your job to save the world, but actually, maybe you can make some points to the Saudis. Maybe this is Gary Neville's argument, that maybe you go and have, this is not Gary Neville argument, but the broader, you go and have the Olympics in China, which has got a pretty grim human rights records in parts of the country, and you go and you shine a light on their excesses and what's going on, and you actually bring them into the tent and you talk to them and you see if you can actually improve standards. That might be a little bit naive of me, but I think it's better I think collaboration is better than complete rejection.
You've hit the nail on the head there, where I think what's been missing the most from the past 13 years is that dialogue between supporters and owner, because it's just been non-existent for
I talked to his people
so
about
long.
it. I've talked to his people about it. I said, seriously, you've got a great club there. Why don't you go? I'm having a meeting with them. And I said, why don't you go and just communicate, just show some empathy, show you're human, we know you're a Tottenham fan, but I wasn't talking to Mike directly, but just go and just, Roman Abramovich, for all his faults, he loves football. He turns up at games. I've seen him down at Cobham watching the under-17s. He is emotionally engaged with the club. Now, our government has an issue with him. Fine, that's politics way above my head. But in terms of the emotional engagement, you ask Chelsea fans, you won't find a Chelsea fan to have a word against him because he's engaged. Little things like a former player comes over and has got a book launch somewhere in London. The organisers and the fans have organised something. Oh, they did it with Eddie McCready. You'll suddenly find the whole event has been covered by Abramovich. Little things like that, whatever that was, 30 grand, probably nothing it's nothing to Abramovich, but just little things like that, treating people as human, having an emotional connection with it, and also, come on, have some fun. If you own Newcastle United, you have got an unbelievable, I don't want to say toy because it's far too important for that, but you've got this amazing just club. Enjoy it, sit there and watch it, just get the former players back in, have Rob Lee and Alan Shearer and all these great players all over the place, which is what Abramovich did with Chelsea, bring the former players back in, re-engage. It's not difficult, but Mike Ashley works in strange ways.
Yeah, you can say that again. I mean, what you touched upon there with Chelsea, and then Mike Ashley seemingly did the opposite. You referenced before Alan Shearer's testimonial, which was when Shearer's bar was opened, and then Mike Ashley renames it and takes the name off Alan Shearer. So,
by the way, I'm just checking. Is Les Ferdinand still DJing? Because I left quite late that night, and Les Ferdinand was still on the decks. I'm not sure I got home. How I got home, I can't remember which hotel I was staying. No, Newcastle's a special place. So, and I just think whoever comes in, they are very prudent. First, they're getting it, I think, quite cheaply, given the fact that the Premier League would eventually bounce back from COVID, and they are getting a special place. I mean, can you imagine being chairman of Newcastle United? I can remember going and seeing Sir John Hall in the boardroom. I think there was something that my paper or another writer had written, and he was a little bit upset by it, and it was just for his emotional engagement with the club and the city. And I walked away thinking there is a proud man that he is chairman of that great club.
I've imagined being chairman of Newcastle quite a lot, especially over the past 13 years. What would you do differently? Well, where do you start? With this prospective takeover, we're now in the days of financial fair play and whatnot. Is it going to be as simple as straightforward as a Manchester City style takeover, or even a Chelsea style takeover back in the day of Abramovich? Or are we now looking at something more like Wolverhampton Wanderers, where it's got to be a bit more sustained and slow build?
But that's good, isn't it? You want sustained. I don't think it'll necessarily. Look, we're assuming that it goes through. I personally think on the back of COVID that UEFA might loosen some of the FFP requirements, which is quite ironic given that they've got the battle going on with Manchester City at the 8th to 10th of January at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So there'll be a lot of focus on that, but I think they'll come in. I can remember when Shearer had that brief period in charge, and he had a press conference before, was it the final game of the season against Aston Villa or down at Villa Park? A few years back. Anyway, when Shearer was in temporary charge. And I remember going up and seeing him as a press conference, and he was talking about the long-term growth of Newcastle United and using himself as an example. He said, listen, we develop all this talent. I mean, can I just get this down?
Yeah.
I was given that. Can you see that? Whoops.
Wolves End Boys Club.
Yeah, okay. You look at what 5 England internationals have come from there. Forster, I think the most recent, obviously Michael Carrick, people like that. So all those players, all that talent that you've got on your doorstep, why should it be going down to Southampton? Why should it be going down to West Ham? You've got to hold on to these people. So absolutely, there will be investment, and I'm sure in our very restrained media world that we live in, that you'll be linked with everyone under the sun. But it's pointless going for a Neymar. Why don't you develop your own Neymar? I'm sure there's a kid. I mean, I know Michael Carrick pretty well, and he's investing money in Wallsend and in areas around Newcastle to develop young players, to give the kids on the street a chance. That's what, for me, Newcastle is about. He's holding on to a Gaza. You got a couple of good years out of Gaza. Having Chris Waddle playing, and just holding on to them rather than heading south. Obviously, they're going to move on at some point, but get 2 to 3 years out of these players, rather than Michael Carrick getting on a train at 16 and going down to West Ham. That's what you've got to do, as well as bring in the. So you can balance it.
You've got Matty Longstaff's contract expiring at the end of next month. That should be priority. It's an easy win for a new owner, you would think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't get the impression that he wants to leave. He might want to get away from Mike Ashley. He might want a better financial deal. Fair enough, but I'm sure that he'd rather stay at Newcastle long term if it was in good hands and he was paid properly.
Let's just touch briefly on Project Restart, because this time next month, as we talk now, Premier League football in theory will be back. Is it too soon, or have the Premier League kind of gone about things the right way, do you think?
I think June the 12th is too soon. I'd rather see it a fortnight later. I think this week, as we speak, they've got a lot of persuading to do, particularly with Watford players. Troy Deeney's obviously come out and spoken, even before there were the 3 positive tests from the, whatever it is, 38, 39 people they tested at Watford. And Troy's argument, which I have a lot of sympathy for, is that he doesn't want to pick up the virus, take it home. He's got a 5-month-old with respiratory problems. So I completely respect him for that. And I think there will be individuals, but I've talked to clubs where everyone in the dressing room who's on that WhatsApp group, no one has expressed any hint of the fact they won't be reporting to training. And we're seeing it already now. You've only got to look at some of the pictures being posted by the clubs. You can see that the players are reporting. I thought when they announced that on Tuesday that 6 of the 748 had tested positive. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say because any positive test is a concern, and all these individuals were having to self-isolate for a week. But actually, you thought, well, it's only 6. The Germans had a few more than that, obviously, with they tested more people. But that actually football can come back. I mean, I do want the season decided on the pitch for sporting reasons. Everyone's talking about the financial reasons, and look, I get that because their jobs at stake, broadcasting revenue at stake. I get all that. We know it's the greed is good league, but also I just think it's right. I don't want to look back in the record books and see a huge great asterisk on the story of the season, which said it was decided in a committee room, it was decided by points per game, or even worse, it was voided. Let's finish it on the pitch, but everyone has to be safe. I've said this from the word go. Let us be guided by the doctors. Let the real heroes in all this, not necessarily the footballers that the likes of me put up on a pedestal, but the real heroes, the doctors and the nurses, the amazing people in the NHS. Let's have them winning their battle before football comes back. So look, I think we're a good 6 weeks away from seeing a ball kicked in anger, and probably 6 months away from seeing fans back into grounds.
Watching the Bundesliga last weekend, very odd experience with the kind of lack of atmosphere. Do you think the Premier League are kind of using the Bundesliga as a sort of a litmus test to see, well, if everything goes well over there because they're a few weeks ahead of us, things in theory should be okay here? Or is it more sort of what Danny Rose has come out and said, that they're just being used as lab rats?
I think they are being used slightly as lab rats, not so much by the Premier League, but I think more by politicians. I think in one moment, Matt Hancock's throwing them under a bus, saying they've got to do more, and now they're being rushed back into a workplace and expected to look. Every workplace is a place of risk, and a football training ground will be sanitized to the inch of its life. But they are still the ones who are being effectively ordered to break social distancing and kick other people. Obviously, it's in a sporting environment, but still, they may well become infected. So I can understand the concerns of Troy Deeney and Danny Rose. But remember, they only need to get 11 players on the pitch. And with 5 substitutes as well, they may bring in some of the under-23s. So I think the season will be played. But clearly, the Premier League have got to do a bit of a PR job in the Watford dressing room to convince. Because Troy Deeney is very, very powerful. I spoke to Nigel Pearson for an interview last week. And I said, what are you going to do about Troy Deeney? He's your captain, he's your most important player. And he said, well, I'm not going to force him to come back. We've got to remember, and this is Todd Cantwell's quote, players are people too. We've got to remember that. I've told the office I will, absolutely go and cover a match because it's my job. And you look at all risks in life. But then I haven't got a 5-month-old baby with respiratory problems at home. So I completely respect anyone who doesn't want to go. So I do think football will be played. I think June the 12th is too early. I think we've got to respect the science, respect the doctors, and bring it back. I slightly find it patronising that government say, let's bring association football back to lift the morale of the nation. I mean, I don't think the morale of the nation will be lifted if a footballer gets ill. I don't think the morale of the nation will be lifted if it's perceived that medical services are being taken away from the NHS. So I think football's got to tread very carefully. But I think it's absolutely right to come back, obviously for the broadcasting reasons, but also, I want Liverpool crowned on the pitch. I want relegation sorted out on the pitch. Okay, some of the teams might be slightly weaker, but at least it'll be on the pitch. I want the European positions sorted on the pitch as well. And remember, each position is worth a couple of million quid as well. So, there's as ever, there's money to play for.
I genuinely could talk to you all day. But thank you so much for your time, Henry. I appreciate it so much that you've spoke to us on Newcastle Fans TV. And if and when the takeover does go through, make sure you have a can on us.
I think I'll have more than one can.
You're not alone there, but
because you know what, you deserve it. Journalists, we can all sort of sit in our ivory towers and write about you. But unless actual people come and talk to you and stand in the strawberry on that amazing, is it the Tyneside Irish Centre? Well, I got, the Rabbit Warren just near you. I went upstairs and there were people dancing and having Guinness. And this was before the match. This was about lunchtime. Unless people have been in there and talked to Newcastle United fans and understood what it's like, they've walked in your shoes, they've had 13 years of this. Unless they've done that, I don't think they can understand properly. And anything they write will inevitably have an asterisk on it that actually, do they know the full story? So look, good luck to you. But there will be issues with the human rights.
Spot on, yeah. And absolutely, that is very much a debate, but a debate for after the canned headache's gone.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope it's a long headache.